There is a story rarely told, and when it is, it's usually in whispers, behind closed doors, buried in academic texts, or laced in coded language. It's the story of how Africa and Africans were not just seen as victims of history, but as threats to empire, threats to order, threats to power. For centuries, the dominant narrative for Africa as the dark continent, primitive, chaotic, and incapable of greatness without foreign intervention. But what if that was never true? What if the truth was more sinister? That Africa's potential, its riches, its people, its spiritual systems, and its power posed such a challenge to global empires that it had to be neutralized by any means necessary. This is not just about slavery, colonialism, or racism, though all play a part. This is about fear. The fear of African unity. The fear of Black power. The fear that if left alone, Africa would rise and shake the foundations of the world. Today, we journey through the echoes of time to uncover the real reasons why Africans, our ancestors, our cultures, and even our dreams were seen as threats. From ancient kingdoms that rivaled Rome to revolutionaries who defied colonial rule, to Black movements across the diaspora, this is the untold history of suppressed greatness. Welcome to the truth they tried to bury. Before slavery, before colonial maps carved Africa into foreign property, there were empires, powerful, organized, scientifically advanced civilizations that stunned the world. Kemet, ancient Egypt, was African. It wasn't some isolated miracle in the desert. It was the crown jewel of a continental network of trade, philosophy, science, and spiritual wisdom. The pyramids still defy modern explanation. The temples and papyri recorded advanced medicine, astronomy, and mathematics, and perhaps most importantly, they were unapologetically Black. But Egypt wasn't alone. Nubia, Kush, Aksum, Mali, Great Zimbabwe, Songhai, Benin, each of these civilizations possessed structures of governance, systems of education, standing armies, and global trade routes. Mansa Musa, the 14th century emperor of Mali, was so wealthy that his pilgrimage to Mecca crashed the economies of cities he passed through. And yet children in modern schools are taught that African history began with chains. This is the root of the threat. The idea that Africans could govern themselves, build empires, master engineering, literature, and trade directly contradicted the colonial narrative that justified enslavement and conquest. If African excellence was acknowledged, the entire structure of white supremacy would collapse. So instead, it was erased, or worse, rewritten. Africans didn't just threaten the colonial world with wealth and science, they threatened it spiritually. Indigenous African spiritual systems. Ifa, Vodun, Kemetic spirituality, Dagara cosmology, emphasized ancestral reverence, cosmic order, and community alignment. These were not superstitions, they were systems, sophisticated, tested, and potent. European invaders quickly realized something chilling. African spirituality unified people. It gave them courage, meaning, and rebellion. And most importantly, it offered a worldview that didn't require European approval or salvation. This is why African spirituality was banned, demonized, and violently replaced with European Christianity. Missionaries came with Bibles in one hand and soldiers in the other. Drums were outlawed. Shrines were burned. Languages were erased. Initiated priests were hunted. But even in the Americas, where millions were enslaved, African spirituality survived in hidden forms. Santeria, Candomblé, Hoodoo, and Haitian Vodou, and wherever it lived, rebellion followed. The Haitian Revolution, led by formerly enslaved Africans fueled by Vodou rites, terrified the West. Haiti became the first free black republic in the modern world, and it set off a domino effect of fear. If Africans could rise once, they could rise again. From Olaudah, Equiano, to Queen Nzinga, to Zumbi of Palmares, educated and fearless Africans constantly disrupted the narrative. The transatlantic slave trade wasn't just a crime, it was a war on knowledge. Africans who could read, strategize, organize, and inspire were seen as the most dangerous. Plantation owners in the Americas enforced laws prohibiting the teaching of reading and writing to enslaved Africans. Why? Because a literate slave was a revolutionary waiting to happen. This is the hidden history of rebellion. Slaves who escaped and formed maroon colonies, freedom fighters who led insurrections, and teachers who secretly passed down culture and resistance in coded language, songs, quilts, and symbols. Every form of control, economic, religious, legal, was designed to suppress the threat of African intelligence, because the oppressors knew it wasn't ignorance that enslaved Africa. It was stolen power. Fast forward to the 20th century, the scramble for Africa is complete. Colonies are under European rule. But something else is happening, something terrifying to the West. Across continents, Africans and descendants of the African diaspora are starting to talk to each other. Marcus Garvey dreams of a global black empire. Kwame Nkrumah envisions a United States of Africa. Patrice Lumumba, Malcolm X, Thomas Sankara, and Muammar Gaddafi all echo a similar idea. Africa must unite or perish. Pan-Africanism was more than politics. It was a threat to the global capitalist structure. If African nations controlled their own resources, gold, oil, uranium, diamonds, the Western world would lose its lifeline. If Africans dictated trade terms, the entire post-colonial structure would fall. So what happened? Assassinations, coups, foreign interference, sanctions, divide and rule strategies. These leaders weren't just feared because of their policies, they were feared because of their ideas. Because ideas ignite people, and awakened Africans across the diaspora are the one thing the world powers fear most. In America, Brazil, the Caribbean, and Europe, Black identity itself became a form of resistance. To be African was to be othered, but also to be feared. Black Panthers, Rastafarians, Afrobeat musicians, poets, and authors began to reclaim African identity not as a burden, but as a badge of power. When Fela Kuti screamed, "Water no get enemy," he wasn't just making music, he was making war on the system. When James Baldwin, Angela Davis, and Assata Shakur spoke, they weren't asking for pity. They were shaking the gates of empire. The global Black image transformed from passive to powerful, and that made it even more dangerous. Pop culture, politics, literature, fashion, all became battlegrounds. Dreadlocks, afros, and dashikis weren't just fashion, they were war cries. The threat wasn't just Black violence, it was Black unity, Black memory, Black excellence, the very idea that Black people remembered who they were, and that memory could set the world on fire. Today, the fear has shifted, but it hasn't disappeared. Now the threat is digital. Young Africans are online, connected, educated, and angry. They're building movements, #NSARS, Black Twitter, African Renaissance, Afrofuturism. They're reclaiming narratives, rewriting history, and bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of media. This is why tech companies censor certain voices, why African apps and platforms are rarely funded, why the global north still dictates AI ethics, cryptocurrency policy, and scientific publishing. The fear now is that Africans will not just rise physically, but mentally. that they will build their own algorithms, currencies, neural nets, and futures without permission. The future is African, and for the first time in centuries, that future is in African hands. So why were Africans viewed as a threat? Because they were never meant to be slaves, never meant to be silent, never meant to forget. Africa was a threat because it had memory, because it had fire, because even when chained, its spirit marched on. The empires knew what many of us are just beginning to rediscover, that Africa was the mother of civilization, not its orphan, that blackness is not a curse, but a call to rebuild, to remember, to reclaim. They feared our drums, our dreams, our defiance, and most of all, they feared our unity. But the time of fear is ending. The question now is not why they feared us. The question is, what will we do with that power they tried so hard to bury? Will we rise, or will we remain echoes? Africa is rising. The world feels it. The empire fears it. But history is watching.